Good morning and welcome back. It is now Monday, July 29th. We're just on the cusp of August, which means we're getting very close to harvest season. As you can see behind me, this barley field is ripening up quick. Let's take a look at her. You can see the overall appearance of a lot of barley fields like this one. We are, maturing, ripening up pretty well, but you start to take a closer look and you can really see how much green is still in here. A lot of the main stem heads, we are in hard dough stage. They're quite firm. They're just kind of ripening and drying down. But there is a lot of other green heads in here, be these, later emerged plants or tillers that are still quite, milky or even soft dough. So we're still a little ways away from harvest yet. Probably at least, another week or two. Dryland wheat is coming along really good this week. You can see this whole field is really starting to turn. A lot of these heads now are in the hard dough stage and are well and nicely filled out here, but there's still lots and lots of green heads still mixed in here. There is some grasshoppers in this field, but really it's not too terribly bad. The risk from grasshoppers at this point is kind of changing. There's very little leaf material for them to chew on, and the heads are mostly filled anyways. But what they will quite often do is they'll come along, these green heads, they'll eat that peduncle right underneath the head. It's usually the last piece of green material on the stem. And then they'll just dump all your heads on the ground. So got to watch out for that, but I'm not seeing much of that in this field at all. Yellow peas are ripening up real nice still this week. This field here in particular is a difficult one. This one has a lot of hills and low areas. You can see up in front of me here, we got a low area saline bottom, which has no crop in it, surrounded by grass green peas. And then as we look farther to the south, you can see we're still very green down there. That was because a hailstorm moved through there and wiped out that area of the field quite a while ago now, actually. That was pre-bloom, basically. Whereas this area that I'm in here, we're turning really good here, but you can still see there is quite a lot of green plants mixed in and lots of green pods still up on the top. So this field is going to be difficult to have a single time for desiccation unless we're patient and we wait a lot longer. Let's take a look at the NDVI from satellite imagery and we'll see how variable it is. Alright, here I've pulled up the satellite imagery on my iPad on one soil, so you can see on this field, the north side, we are ripening up pretty good, but we do have that one low spot here, still very, very green. And then as we move farther south, the effects of that storm that moved through and hit this area of the field are more apparent. So we're a lot greener, especially as the farther south we go, and we're way far away from desiccation here yet. We're just in pod development. So we're going to have to basically treat these two quarters to the north separately from the rest as far as desiccation timing goes, but even then we're going to have to let that green spot in the middle dry down a bit first. Well, the kochia is really starting to flower this week. You can see all the little flowers on this guy, all these tiny little yellow flowers. So now is a good time to get this stuff mowed if you have a patch like this at like field entrances or along the edge of a fence line kind of thing. It's a good time to get it mowed, get those flowers under control, hopefully reduce the seed set so we don't have a problem next year. Trying out some new equipment today. I got one of these Bushel Plus mini combines, so I'm going to give this a try in some winter wheat. I know it's not really ripe enough yet, but I want to give it a try anyways, see how well it holds up. And I also have a portable moisture tester here, so I'm planning on using this mini combine to harvest my plots. We'll see how well it goes. I might have bitten off more than I can chew, but we will see. So anyways, let's see how she works. Well, the little mini combine did a pretty admirable job, I'd say. Obviously, as you can see, crop conditions were quite tough. There's a lot of green kernels in there yet, so that was hard thrashing going through there, but did pretty well. But as you can see, the crop itself is starting to really ripen and mature, but we're still a ways away from harvest yet. Well, I'm back in that field of oats where I found the really high population of grasshoppers last week. The grasshoppers are indeed still here, and the population is still very high. However, it has now been sprayed with coragen, and you can really start to see the effect. You look down underneath the canopy here, and now our ground here is just covered with dead hoppers. So as we move through the canopy, you just see them everywhere all over the ground. So we are controlling them now as they move out of that pasture and into the field. However, there is still a lot of them coming, so it will continue to work for the next several weeks, and hopefully we'll keep the grasshoppers from getting worse throughout the field. This field of peas, I have a nice tall vantage point where I don't even have to fly my drone, which is good because it's pretty windy today. You can see this field is turning really nice and evenly. There is still some green plants here and there in it, And there's one lonely green spot way out there, but other than that, it has turned really nice and evenly, so I'm really not too worried about putting a desiccant on this one. All it needs is probably another week of time and it's going to be ready to combine. Here's a closer look at the same field. You can see it's ripening up pretty well, though there is still the odd green plant here and there. Lots of these pods are drying down pretty rapidly. We got some nice yellow peas in there. Still going to be a little bit tough, but we're really not all that far away from combining in here. Well, some of the dryland wheat is really starting to come along. It is definitely very, very stressed with drought stress in here, but the heads are managing to fill. We're just not quite in hard dough yet, but we're not too far away. But you can see, looking down in the canopy, we have a bunch of lodged stems, so I'm definitely suspecting there's some sawfly in here. So let's cut a few stems and see what we can find. Yeah, there is definitely some sawfly in this field. I had to cut about 10 stems before I did find one, but you can see that it's all full of frass in here from the sawfly feeding its way through. So there's definitely a little bit in here. I'll have to keep an eye out for it. If it starts to lodge or anything like that, then best management practice would be to swath it before any more of it can fall down. Well, some of the stressed out dryland canola definitely has a little bit more insects in it compared to last week. You can see all those little nymph lyguses are starting to get quite a bit bigger than they were last week. So some of them are just starting to get at the point now where they would count towards threshold with the patterns on their backs, but most of them are still too small. You can also see we seem to have an increase in diamondback moth larvae, but it's still relatively a small amount, so I'm really not too worried about it right now. A lot of this canola is going to come along pretty quick. It won't be too long. We'll be checking for color in the pods here. Starting to see the first little bits of sclerotinia starting to show up in crop. So here in this canola field, there is a couple of plants where you can see are kind of dead lying in the canopy here. When you pull it up and break open the stem here, you can see we have a nice little sclerotia body right there in the stem. So that is your confirmation that this is sclerotinia and not blackleg. So far seeing very little of it. It'll only just really start visibly showing up in the crop about this time and might progressively show up more in the next coming weeks. Well, here's everybody's favorite weed this time of the year, the burdock plant. There is quite a few different species here. This is probably greater burdock. It's about 5 feet tall. This one in particular is just really starting to flower, so it hasn't really had seed set yet on it. But this one right over here is just blooming, so definitely, not seed set in it either yet, but you can see it is more developed. It is a little bit farther along. At this size and this height, there is really no chemical control that is really going to do much for you or prevent it from going into seed set. Your best option is to chop this guy off with a shovel, and then when it starts to regrow, if it starts to regrow, to control it at that time. Well, I forgot the good camera at home on the charger, so I apologize for the terrible wind noise you're probably getting on the iPhone footage, but fall ride down by McGrath is starting to come off and looking pretty good so far. Well, the safflower is looking very, very moisture stressed, but it is starting to flower. You can see these buds are really just starting to open. You can see we got a nice yellow one here, some orange ones. There's kind of some mixed colors in here, mostly some various shade of orange, but you can see we have a whole lot of buds left to open in here. So probably next week, this field is going to be in full bloom. A lot of the flax fields are like this one, and they are pretty much out of bloom now, partially due to moisture and heat stress. There is still the odd bud here and there, but for the most part, all the petals are down on the ground, and we're well into bulb development. We are still quite a long ways away from harvesting a crop like this. It'll be at least a few more weeks before things start to mature. Corn is definitely continuing to get taller this week. It is looking really good. As long as it has enough water, it is really loving this heat. So she's all looking pretty good. No tasseling or anything like that. Any of my cornfields yet, and aphids have not been a problem at this time. You can actually see here in the upper corn stem, we do still have quite a few nodes that have not separated yet, so we are still going to gain some more height. And you can see the tassel is up here developing, and it is looking pretty good, but we are still a few leaves away from it emerging, but it's going to happen relatively soon. Out in my PGPR canola plot today, and everything in here is looking not too bad. I'm not seeing any big differences. You can't really even tell where the plots are versus the rest of the field. If I hadn't done the weed eating around the edges, I wouldn't be able to see it at all. Yeah, I wish I could say that, some of these plots are flowering longer and harder than others, but I'm just not really seeing it. They are very consistent with the surrounding crop, and I'm not seeing any massive differences at all, even in this one, which received everything all at once, 6+ times. no big differences at the moment. Still waiting for it to finish flowering. Once that's done, I'll start pulling a few plants and we'll be comparing, you know, number of pods per plant from plot to plot. Well, it's been another hot week, but we are coming to an end. It looks like we should get slightly cooler temperatures over the weekend, but I don't believe there's really any long-term relief in sight as far as moisture goes, or really temperature. We're supposed to be up into, well into the 30s again for next week, so I'm sure we're going to see a lot of crops like this canola behind me here really start to mature and ripen up in the next week or so as things really start to dry down. So we'll see you next week.